Tonight, we have a really special guest. It's one of the most successful entrepreneurs within the Czech startup scene. He was pretty successful with founding a couple of companies like Socialbakers, maybe you know. And recently, he's started his own new project, Time is Limited, where this is something which we would like to talk to you more about it. And recently, he was as well mentioned in Forbes 30 under 30. So please give a warm welcome to Jan Rezab.
Hi, guys.
Okay, so yeah, great that you make it here. Could you tell us just for the beginning, some information, some background about yourself? Because I believe that many people here know you, but maybe for some of them who don't know, the basic story about you, just give us a brief introduction.
So, yeah, the Forbes 30 under 30 has been quite a while back now. That was not an under 30 anymore. But I started my journey 16 or 17 years ago. I quit high school because I thought building projects is better. I started a mobile games company, built it for 7 or 8 years. It was called Red Boss. It tremendously failed on me. I mean, that's what happens. And it was a great learning experience. And I think that was, at the end of the day, my sort of school was getting kind of into it right away. And that's when basically we founded Socialbakers. And that's now 10.5 years ago. We built Socialbakers into 450 people, into a massive, big global company with over 10 offices around the world. And I ran that as CEO for 8 years. And for the last 2 years, 2.5 years or so, we've been building Time is Limited, and which we can talk about a bit more about what we plan to do.
I was just curious, since I was looking, for all of your bio, and you built from, I think, 4 people till 400, Socialbakers. Could you remember who was your first client?
Well, it was 2. So there were a couple clients that kind of came in self-serve and bought the $50 to $100 pack. But I do remember convincing our first, official sort of invoiced client. We always had clients that are self-serve that just bought a package on the website. But then there were the ones you have to convince and that kind of, they prepay and stuff like that. And this was an agency in France. So I do remember that very, very well. But the first clients of Socialbakers were actually Czech because we operated as a social media agency. So the very, very, very first client was Ogilvy here with Tomáš Jindříšek, and he placed a lot of trust in me and in us as a team, and kind of then took off. Sounds easy, right?
Okay, and as I mentioned, that you really built a company which went through some rapid growth, but you still wanted to retain some startup culture within this company. So what is your recipe for to retain this culture despite this rapid growth?
I think that there is no one recipe for a culture after, I would say, 100, 150 people. Until 150 people, the culture is the people. Whoever you hire, whoever you mix in, however you set the tone and the direction, that's what the culture is going to be. You don't have to define it. You don't have to set it. You don't have to put it on a wall. You don't have to even put it in writing often. You have to remind people of what those values are constantly when you see them, but it's a small enough amount of people that you can move it on them. Now, after 150 people, that becomes tremendously harder. So I think throughout the years, we, you run into certain growth issues that some of the people that you have are maybe not in line with what you would expect. But it's tough. You have to implement layers of middle management and more layers. And at 450 people, it gets tough. And for me, I think it was the right time to hand over as CEO because I don't intend to run a company that is 500 people growing to maybe 1,000 people or something like that. I want to start, small and scale something with, smaller group of people.
Yeah, and here is time is limited. So could you just tell us where this idea came from? Just what is it?
So I think that a lot of us work with in startups or tech companies, but a majority of the people are employed by big corporates, big companies, especially white collar workers who sit in front of a computer all day long. And I think that 150 people rule really did not apply just to Socialbakers. It really applies to companies in general. Once you reach a certain amount of people, the productivity does go down. And so when my company reached that amount of people, I thought to myself, well, am I doing something wrong with productivity? Why are we having meetings that don't necessarily lead to as much progress as I would expect? And I went to ask some of the clients that I had back in the day, big corporates, people that they had a marketing team of 900 people, spread across 30 different offices, or even much, much, much bigger teams. And they started laughing and said, we have a much bigger problem. Everybody's just constantly in meetings. We have a meeting in order to organize another meeting to solve a problem through a meeting. And like whatever is on the agenda, must have a meeting. But that's not how things get done. And oftentimes, people would sit there, look at each other, they discuss, but no one would take notes. No one would take actions. No one would really solve the damn thing or, log in to even check something. So I think there's a lot of unproductivity that I've seen, and that led me to the idea, well, can we measure this? And can we look at it from an analytical standpoint? Because people, 20 years ago, people had email, calendars, and a couple, and Office. Today, we leave a lot more traces inside our companies. So what we call internally public data, you have calendars that are not in the cloud, G Suite, Office 365 that are shared into the whole company. You have public channels on Slack. You have Workplace, that again, there are public messages. And those signals that people leave, we found out that they actually can be translated into understanding of a sense of productivity or efficiency of the company and how it operates. What's its sort of heartbeat? What is the internal social network of the company?
Okay, so you are, if I understood it well, you are as well analyzing, monitoring, the data from all the users, employees within the company, and after that, you'll give as well some reporting tool, with some graphics or some presentation, layer, or
exactly. We're working on sort of we have a social mapping layer where we can map from just calendar data, for example, where we can map the relationship within, between departments in a company and how it evolves and change over time. Now, if it changes a whole lot, there's not a lot of consistency and trust going on between these. There might be a lot of fluid communication, but that might mean just everything's changing too fast. Now, that might be a good thing, that might be a bad thing. It depends on where it changes. But as a CEO, if you don't have that data, we believe in the future you'll be flying blind unless you have this data. And when one of our fresh investors came to the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and he told him, "Wow, this is this is a business to our investor that you shouldn't go into because Microsoft's going all in on it." And that's why he invested. So because we believe that there needs to be somebody independent outside of the big players, because Microsoft's not going to go and analyze Slack, for example.
Yeah, you mentioned right now the important thing about funding. So how you started the company? I mean, you use your own resources, or you found some investors. So,
well, Time is Limited is heavily bootstrapped as of now. We're client funded as well, so we got a lot of initial clients that helped. We paid for different pilot projects to us, and we sort of built the core from that. Very, very soon, we're going to be announcing our first institutional round of funding. And it's going to be from two investors that have never invested in the region. And it's going to be their first investment in the whole region, actually. And they're one of the biggest investors in the world, which are very happy to bring more new, fresh investors, which, if they come for board meetings, they're going to be meeting more Czech startups, which means hopefully more investments coming into the region.
And once you were pitching, to all of these investors, what is your one sentence, page, how you would describe your startup?
Time is Limited is one of those companies that doesn't have that, one-liner, really. Like, you can say your people productivity analytics, tool that helps CEOs and management teams improve the performance of their team by looking at the data, but it really doesn't cover all we do. And it really is a brutal oversimplification.
And what about your clients? Because you are on the market for, you mentioned 2 years, you started the company. So are you focusing on some particular areas, sectors, or?
Our verticals, we are, kind of, if the company has digital communication, and that's our target, that's our client. Any company that has over 200-300 office workers, not factories. So if you have 50 people and 500 in the factory, we're not a factory process, optimization company. So once you have that amount, you're our target. Right now, it seems that the companies that need that most are, coming from the banking world, tech world, and, many of the brands that I was used to working with. But, obviously this is completely, I was used to working with marketing teams. Now you need to kind of work with completely opposite, completely different spectrum of the company, which is HR people, CEOs, and CIOs or innovation or tech digital leaders in the companies.
And within these companies, could you tell us maybe some numbers how actually this this application this software could can improve the internal processes?
Yeah, without divulging into obviously any client specifics, without naming, we have created efficiencies that have created an obvious mathematical pattern where you can say, okay, if the company does X, they will improve their sales by 20%. Mm-hmm. So, and this was, mathematically proven that would happen if they do it. So obviously the company, then this is not like ships that you just turn this way or that way when, there's sometimes thousands of people involved. So then they start steering slowly and they pilot it and they work on it. And we keep measuring this progress. One of the bigger trends now is are also agile transformations. So there the companies, have very, very clear goals set, how it should improve their productivity, how these agile transformations should, ship product faster and do other things. And so far we're the only sort of analytics tool out there that claims to measure, the agile transformations. But the ones that do it right now do it through engagement surveys, which is asking people, hey, how do you think it's working? And the people, usually in the companies, they'll lie. On these engagement surveys, surprise, surprise. I remember a friend of mine, he worked at Google, and he wrote in one of the internal engagement surveys, again, without divulging anything confidential, I know there are Googlers here, that, he was rated, he was rating something in the thing and rated 3 stars, just not bad, something was 3 stars. And immediately started getting calls from HR. Is everything okay? Are you fine? Are you feeling? You were 3 stars in that survey. So what did that person do next time? 5 stars. Everything's perfect, right? And everything was not perfect. In fact, it was much worse than it was the time before. But put in 5 stars, just not to be bothered. And people lie in these surveys all the time, and they are biased. They're all sorts of things, but the data, the meeting pattern of who you're meeting as a person, who you're communicating with, that can't lie. And the data is internally public, which means, the company has a chance to, okay, maybe I look at, your calendar and take a look at but that's nonsense. You really want to understand team dynamic. You don't want to look at individuals, unless they're salespeople. Those you really want to look at individuals.
And what about, some current topic? What about GDPR, internal? It's working, within this.
We are it's again internally public data. We really outside of EU we don't touch sort of the things that are not internally public unless they were made public. So for example, as I mentioned, the sales guys, their emails are public because they're made public through a sales CRM, usually like Sync. You see the Pipedrive guys here, you click an email Sync and it automatically makes your emails with specific clients public to everyone in the company, shared. So again, that's the moment where it will become internally public. So we analyze those signals, and from a GDPR perspective, we're a GDPR data processor. So and the employee actually does not have a right to opt out of processing because it kind of like, you could opt out of your company putting in an HR system, right? That's not feasible. So it's the company that operates it. And of course, if they stop becoming clients, you have to remove everything and all of that. But from that perspective, we just analyze kind of what's there. We have to anonymize and aggregate and do sorts of steps. But the compliance is actually, the GDPR regulation kind of helps us because it defines where we are and what we do very well. And the people in the company have a right to understand what we do with their data, obviously. So we have to make it clear to them what we're doing, how we're processing it, and then surface it through dashboard. But it's pretty clear from the use case what we're doing.
And you mentioned, some. What are the key, the major metrics, the KPIs which you are looking for within all of those data?
These companies are usually, the companies that come to us are already highly unproductive. And surprisingly, they usually know it. But they don't know where the improductivity is coming from, where it's born. And it's not one place, right? Because it's a living organism. It's, hundreds of people or thousands of people. So they don't kind of know where it begins and where it stops. Is it with, lack of digital video conferencing? Is it the fact that, these two teams don't like each other? Is it because management sets too many meetings? And it's usually not one of those things. It's a combination of, 1,000 little things. And, so you're not going to have one KPI to be able to solve and look at these things. So we usually set these maps where you can visualize a lot of metrics at the same time. And this is something where, you can create a relationship map between a cluster of 30 different departments and look at how they kind of process over time, how they communicate, last month and this month, and see that and monitor that. But the KPIs would be like our management attending meetings, meetings of everyone, and the percentage of which, who organizes whose time, our sales guy ramping slower or faster than they did. Is the education team working on my massive 3,000, 5,000 people sales force, or are they, geographically focusing more on a couple of regions, and are they kind of dismissing the outer regions where they kind of don't want to travel maybe?
I actually looked at your website, and I know that
it's a terrible website.
Yeah,
terrible
and
website.
The article on LinkedIn about time is limited, and you mentioned there some calculator or some that you have some online tool which you can connect with the Google through the Google Calendar, and it will basically gives you the access for some like brief analytics, or how this is working?
Yeah, we discontinued that one. It was processing too much data, but we replaced it with a meeting rating tool. So we have, for example, a tool where we think, feedback is a gift. So you log in, right now it's only G Suite, but you log in and you rate a meeting. So you'd go like, okay, I'm coming in and I have a meeting with two people. So I give you, 5 stars for organizing the meeting, but maybe I was, didn't do great of a job, so I can also self-rate myself, and I can rate the outcomes of the meeting. So I give a couple stars, and we're trying to make it more fun. So we're adding GIFs, so you can send each other some fun messages, and or the opposite of fun messages. That meeting was really terrible, and I think some of these meetings really are terrible. And of course, we understand that if you rate your boss's meeting 4 stars, that it doesn't mean that was a great meeting, right? It probably means it was a pretty shitty meeting. But I think context is everything, and the trend of rating, you really want to understand that at an aggregate level of a company. So we're doing more and more to visualize time, and we're working on new methods to visualize, people and their time, both on the individual and on the corporate level, more so on the corporate level these days.
And the business model behind it is some subscription, or it's more about implementation, since you are using it for the large corporations, above 150 employees, as you mentioned. Or
so it's a SaaS, software as a service. Same model as I had with Socialbakers. So you subscribe. Right now we're early on, so we're not taking clients for like a yearly subscription. We're doing 6-month pilots. We're optimizing the product, where the platform is very early, very fresh. So we can't handle too many clients at this point, which is good, because then you get a chance to focus on the ones you do have and give them the attention that they need. And we're doing a lot of manual work around the initial clients, which was also the case in Socialbakers. We're like, it's a lot of overhead. We're not making a lot of money on these clients, but we're trying to really take their feedback and apply it to the platform and kind of run that as a circle, so we make sure that it gets better and better every month.
And how many clients you have so far?
We only have a few clients, handful, really.
Okay, and I believe that you are not doing it on your own. So what about your team?
So we have a team of 12 people. We are hiring, by the way. We're hiring about 13 people right now. Most of them in tech, product, UX, any back-end engineers, front-end engineers, API engineers. Come to me after the meeting. I'm happy to talk to you or hire you. We have Cyril; he can hire you on the spot, basically, if you prove your qualities. So, sorry,
what are the qualities?
I needed to. He'll tell you. Time. Sorry. So we're a team, small team right now, and obviously with more funding, we're going to be growing that and making sure that as much of the product is built on a really good and solid foundation.
And you founded the company only by yourself, or you have some co-founder, or what is the structure?
No, I have one co-founder, and he's here in the front row. That's Cyril. So together, if you average us out, he has a PhD and I have shit, and in average, we have a bachelor degree, because I have elementary school and he has a PhD. So, if you average it out, one college,
And what's the name of your co-founder?
Cyril Heschel. He's right here in the front. Maybe you could stand up so everybody could see you.
Yeah, maybe could you tell us, what do you think is... Yeah, yeah, come on. Yeah, hi, I'm Patrick. Hi. So maybe could you tell us, what do you think is Jan's added value, to this project?
Thank you for
Cyril,
this.
carefully, careful.
Thanks for this comfortable situation.
It was unplanned.
Jan is a 5-star salesman, so it's obvious match that it will work.
And Cyril really likes to describe things at length.
Okay. So thank you for this description. Thanks. Yeah. So right now, yeah, you mentioned the team, and thanks for to let us know you're a co-founder. That's great. And because from your first company, or from your previous companies, you were working with large teams. So what is your strategy in the terms of the teams here, in the time is limited? Are there some specifics, or you would like to have just a small team, maybe a max 20 people? What are your thoughts about the team?
So, I'm going to touch on that. So you mentioned, is it SaaS or is it implementation? So because there's a lot of implementation required on what we provide. So if we provide insights, the CEOs usually think, okay, now I understand that. Now help me fix it, right? And we're not here for that. So we usually need to partner with guys like Deloitte, McKinsey, PwC, or other consulting firms that maybe create an implementation project. Or maybe some of these companies are capable enough to run that on their own. And some of them are, some of them aren't. But we're not going to be able to support them enough, which also on a people side translates to, we don't need that much professional services as, for example, Socialbakers had when it grew. We don't need as many offices to support, the amount of clients that we previously needed to. So I think that, right now the strategy is 80% of the team, product and tech. So no fluff, really focusing everything on building an amazing product. And of course, a little bit of marketing, partnerships, sales has to be there, but we're going to keep that team to a very, very minimum until a proper Series A of funding. So we're going to be closing a €3 million seed funding shortly. We're going to be announcing it in the next month or two. But right now we're going to focus, everything we can, on building out the product and keeping the team at that 20 to 25 people size until we can, prove and scale. We can kind of get there, which will happen in the next 12 to 18 months.
And all the members of your team are based here in Prague, or you have some remote workers around the world?
We're actually, part of our team is based here. The rest of the team is a remote, but we'll be getting a bigger office as we're growing through the next sort of 60, 90 days.
Mm-hmm. And so
in Prague, largely.
Mm-hmm. And what are your, some tips or advices, how to, lead the team remotely, because I know that I saw many, many content about this, from your previous career path. So what do you think is important, to think about if you are CEO or on the C level and you are managing the people?
I think that at our size, everyone's pretty, unique when it comes to how they manage their time. So I think we're trying to find, like-minded people that understand and can self-manage, can kind of be good around their time. And you don't really want to sit and manage those people on a hour-to-hour, minute-by-minute basis. So you're trying to find people that you help, grow and help try and give them the right kind of tasks so they can learn to do everything on their own and eventually give them the full freedom to do so. So I have an internal battle of being between a control freak and a leader that gives advice. I struggle internally with that, with a lot of internal dialogues, but I think I'm getting there, and it's a lot better than it used to be. But it's still I have to learn and grow myself to be a good leader as opposed to a shitty manager.
Yeah, I was curious about your answer because, since I saw the video where you got a tip, for productivity that you should put it like, if you are watching the videos, you should put it like 2 times, speed, so you are more productive. So I was just curious if you are so productive, and for your members of your team.
So I'm not forcing members of my team to watch movies at twice the speed. They can only go plus 50%. That's okay. I think that a lot of the productivity tips that I've shared relate to me and Mike's personal experience. I think the thing that is really the hardest thing always for an entrepreneur is making sure that the tips that you use and the things that you use kind of go forward in the company, and you're all one team and one structure. So even though if one person works in a certain way and you work in a certain way, you have these compatibility points. I don't want to force someone to a 1 hour meeting every day if it's not necessary, right? Time is limited, and we kind of need to learn and live by that motto. And I think every one of us is sort of doing things on their own, but we have to find through good social interaction and good tools behind and a good structure of the company, the path to the best productive company. So we basically want to do what other software as a service companies have done in 8, 9, or 10 years. We want to be able to achieve that in 2 or 3. Now, that's not going to happen by us being slow, and also you really can't take any shortcuts in software as a service. You're gonna build up your platform, and if you oversell it, your clients are gonna go away. And software as a service is a brutal industry. You can say, oh, Jan sold this great contract, $500,000 a year. That's amazing. But the lifetime value of this contract is determined on, kind of you keeping that client. Because if, usually the customer acquisition cost for a software as a service, the standard, the industry standard is 1.3 to 1.4 yearly revenues of that client. Right? That's this customer acquisition cost. So if you retain that, if you convince someone, yeah, you can, and retain them for 1 year, then you're and then they go away, then you're losing money essentially. So your boat's leaking. So you really want to create a foundation. So you can't cheat that. You really have to build out a great platform, a great product, and you have to do it in a certain balance. So for example, the clients that we're acquiring now, they understand where we are. They understand we will also want them to give us, more feedback. But at the same time, we will provide them extra value through what I mentioned at the beginning, through providing our kind of manual input. And, I think Czech is a great ecosystem for software as a service. It's also a great, place for e-commerce, for example. But for software as a service, we have a unique opportunity to go global right away. You can build a global company straight out from Prague. You need very little global offices. And the level of cost that you have still in Prague doesn't compare to the one in New York, doesn't compare to the one in San Francisco. And the companies that could be in the same parameter, $20 million companies in Prague, revenue-wise, versus a $20 million company in San Francisco, what you will be able to build for $20 million in Prague is incomparable to what you can build in San Francisco. You can probably build 5 to 6 times less, which means you can out-develop, your competitors. You can have much more people than your competitors. You can go faster. And we're trying to kind of prove one more time that we can build a huge global software as a service company, and even very fast, from Prague. And I hope that others watch that. I hope that others learn from that and, try and replicate that and build other, great software as a service companies, because it's, great repeatable business, and you can kind of plan for it long term. And, if you build that, it's worth between 5 to 10x of revenues, and the valuations in those spaces are, great.
That's great that you are really talking, about the company and, the connection to the people and, of your team, that you are really trying to build some foundation, and, as well, what about, the developers, and technical guys, because there is, so high demand for this, competence. Technical competence. So what is your, strategy, how you would like to attract, the developers, do you think that they will work for you because they like foundation?
Well, I think that way too many developers in Prague are really stuck in shitty companies, outsourcing companies, agencies masked as product companies, et cetera, et cetera. Or, kind of companies that grew over 1,000 people and are now, they have great tech talent, but that tech talent kind of wants to go. I think it's actually one of the best times for hiring developers. I know there's huge demand for them, but at the same time, I think that there's no better time to joining, a company, a startup, than in its first sort of 1 year of building out the platform. And really, while we're older, a lot of the beginning was, manual work, product, verification, which was highly manual. So the platform building itself is happening right now. So the people that join us will get to influence a big part of that platform. And I think kind of, there's a risk to joining a company early, but it's at the same time for the developers and product people joining, I think it's some of the, best experience, and they'll learn the most. And if I look at the first 20 developers I've worked with at Socialbakers, those are now, 15 of them are some of the best developers I, personally know. So I think there's a huge value in joining early, and we hope that people, developers will see that. If you're here, developers, come and talk to us. I know I haven't mentioned it yet, but...
And what about, scaling to other markets? I know that, you are SaaS, you are in online business, so you can run a business, with the clients all around the world. But are there some particular markets or countries or regions, where you would like to focus in the following, years?
Well, I think for us, we have to look at markets that are very high on cloud adoption. So that have G Suite and Office 365 as opposed to on-premise Exchange. So those markets are more naturally geared west, so US and Western Europe. Not Germany, not France, due to high amount of laborers unions having too much power. These how do you call it? Labor unions, right? Yeah. Thanks. They have too much power there, and they're usually on the board of the companies, and they usually stop any project that has to do with any level of internal analytics, including, by the way, cloud projects. Mm-hmm. So there are hundreds of massive companies in Germany where they just didn't migrate to Office 365 or haven't implemented Slack because of the unions, and that's nonsense. And they'll realize it, but it'll actually make the economy, I think, a bit slower than Germany might have been used to. So we're focusing U.S., sort of West Europe minus Germany, pretty much. Central and Eastern Europe, there's a lot of great companies centered here. So we're also piloting on regional projects. And I think Asia will be a massive market opportunity for us, because if you look at the articles out there, Japan with their overworking culture, China with its, with them trying to operate as efficiently as Western companies, but failing at it so far, they'll need a lot of benchmarks, and they need a lot of insights, and we'll be able to provide those.
I know that you got experience to doing business within the Asia. So what would you say that there are some most important things to think if you would like to expand into those countries?
Well, Asia really is a couple regions in and of itself, right? You get kind of you get Middle East, you get Southeast Asia, China, India separately, and kind of Australia, whatever. Sorry, JD. Small market. But if you look at those, they're different beasts. And I think the best one, obviously, is China, where the middle class has grown to 500 million people, in the last few years, where they're really, pumping the market and pushing the market. And I think there's a massive opportunity. For me, we kind of... I was always pretty good in sales in the Middle East. Obviously, with Socialbakers, not a lot of sales to do in China, since Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a couple others are pretty banned. But I think with time is limited, it's going to be heavily different. So I think we're going to have eventually a big Asia focus, and it will probably end up being the biggest market for us.
And what is actually your strategy for the following, let's say, 5 years? Where would you like to go? What are your major goals?
I think that if we look at the workforce today, as I was mentioning at the beginning, the productivity, the companies are just not very productive, and our goal is, in those 5 years, to already have a meaningful position on the market when it comes to making sure that we've already changed something. I think that right now the problem is even bigger than people realize. There's very limited research on actually the amount of unproductive meetings, but the ones you find ends up hovering, the unproductive meetings are hovering between 40 and 70% of wasted time. Now, that's a lot of time. If you work for 160 hours, and if you're in meetings 100 hours from those 160 hours, that means you've wasted potentially 50 to 70 of those hours. And I mean, on a yearly basis, that's a lot. If you have 1,000-person company, that's huge. And if you calculate that on a 10-year cycle of a company, you're looking at wasting away hundreds of millions in a smaller companies. In larger companies, you're wasting billions of dollars away. I'll give you an example. There's a company with 150,000 employees. Won't name it. A very big company. And they send, on average, 1 or 2 emails to the entire company, 1 page long per day, that are 1 page long, that are marked everyone must read, some new culture thing, some new announcements, some new products, some new this. And because everybody wants to, have a say. If you calculate the time, now, of course, I don't know what percentage actually reads them, okay? But if they would read it, as is mandated by the company, that email costs $3 million to read in people's time. So imagine that person sending it, just like hit send, $3 million, boom. And I think that actually today's companies don't respect their people's time. The managers don't respect their people's time. Development leads, leaders of development teams, vice presidents of engineering, don't respect their people's time. A developer needs time to focus, for example, right? And he gets into the office and maybe his manager says, oh, I don't have time. And so let's meet at 10 a.m. So the guy gets into the office. By the time he makes his coffee, in probably 9:15, and in 45 minutes, he gets to do jack, right? He just doesn't even get into the code, doesn't do pretty much anything, writes a few lines of code. Then has a meeting. At 11, he's already thinking about lunch, leaves by 11:45. And again, he didn't do too much. And the development lead puts a meeting into his calendar at 1 o'clock. By 2:45, this guy has not written many lines of code. And it's already 2/3 of the day gone. So I think that we really need to start having an understanding of how time kind of triples and impacts, right? But the head of engineering might say, oh, but the CTO has put my, diary like that, and he put a management meeting, at 9 a.m. And then the CEO will tell the CTO, well, you have to, I'm very busy. But kind of, where does busyness start? And where does busyness finish? And when do we go and say no? And decline those meetings. So, for example, we're looking at departmental decline rate as a sign of certain health. Now, of course, if it has 100% decline rate, that's probably not very good. But 0 is much worse, right? So if everybody just accepts all meetings, that's not great. But if everybody kind of, don't bother me with that meeting. I don't need to be in that. We also watch average meeting time. If it's going down, we think that's good. Average amount of people in a meeting. If some of these companies have meetings with 5, 10, 20, 30 people, meetings that are 6 hours long. I think every meeting over 3 hours with over 10 people should have a pretty good justification and a calculator in the middle of the room saying how much did this meeting cost till now. And those are expensive meetings. And then, with these regular meetings, don't even get me started on those. People come from regular to regular meetings and they basically don't tell me, how are you? Yeah, how is your everything go? Yeah, sure. 1 hour gone. So.
And so far, what is your experience, with the current clients, for example, with this, for example, with a declining rate and, other KPIs? What is the current information for us, to share with us?
We have a pretty modern set of clients, so I don't think they're at the level of issues that most of the massive companies are. We have a couple of the massive clients where they're showing signs of massive meetingitis. Yeah, so they have way too many meetings. And, we're trying to kind of figure out, and many of those are undergoing different forms of transformation. So we're now trying to measure that, okay, are these now starting to decrease? Are the meetings shorter? Do they have less people, et cetera? It's pretty rudimentary metrics, but when you start connecting, not only calendars, right? That's where we kind of begin, but we've also bought a Slack analytics company right now. So that will help us bring in Slack to the mix. We're discussing with Facebook Workplace how we, run a really nice integration of that. So we've already exported data from services, like SAP, from sales CRMs, and played around with that. For example, in many of the video conferencing tools, you actually have in their APIs, there's a focus percentage. If you run a video call, by the way, you should know that. If you run Zoom, for example, that, the video call actually has a result score by person connected. What percentage of time did they have the window open of the video conferencing sharing? watch out for that, because soon your companies are all going to have metrics around that from time is limited. So no, I'm just not kidding. Anyway, so but don't worry about that. No, I think that it's a good sign, for example, if you're on a client call with your client, so you can see that if one client, of course, you're not going to see, okay, am I a good salesperson because that client did not watch my presentation? You can't look at it at a one-to-one basis. But if across 50 meetings, I had 20% less attentiveness than my average colleagues in the company, then I should probably start thinking about that. Now, previously, that data was really expensive to analyze and really hard to surface. We want to make sure that the manager doesn't even have to touch the data, that it simply gets mailed to the person. Hey, man, this is how you're doing. This is how you could improve. This is where you're standing in the ranks of the company from a percentile, for example, so you don't get to compare, one-on-one, except sales guys. Those you should.
And what about work-life balance? What do you think about this? Because I see that you are so focused on the business, but as well, what about other parts of your life?
I know work. What's the other thing? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I have 2 kids, and I try and devote as much time to them as I can. I also try and have my own hobbies, even though most of that is around work. But I think it's important to integrate, for everyone. I don't think the actual volume of time you spend in the office or working is representing to the quality and the output that you can generate. And I think it's less about work-life balance, but more about work-life integration. So I'm a big supporter of taking holidays. I think everyone in the team should take holidays. I hate the people that say, I haven't had a holiday in 2 years. That come to you and says, so get the hell out of my office, go on the first plane, and clear your head for a fucking week or 2. Because those people are not going to be productive. They're not going to be thinking creatively. It's the same thing as these busy calendars, people being obsessed about having, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of meetings. When do these people think? When do these people get creative about their job? When do they think about strategy? In every one of those meetings? That can happen to some people. For example, my place to think, creatively, conferences. I go to conference, I network, but when there's no one to network with, I sit in a conference speech and suddenly, get a flow of ideas, write them down, boom, great. That's, works for me. For others, I think they really have to just disconnect, be mindful. And we're looking at this busyness rate index, and usually the busy people are the managers. But you don't want those to be the busy people. So I think there's a fundamental shift in how we think of managing teams and companies. And part of them, the way companies think about it, let's run an agile transformation. Okay, so that means, it worked on development teams that they have Scrum or Agile or Kanban or whatever method of agile working. But maybe there's a different way of doing it. And I think that having the most expensive people, the managers, being the busy ones, is not the best use of their time. I think that managers, key managers need to have time controllers that kind of check their time and make sure that they have time for both things, that they also have time for strategy, that really they have people around them to reinforce them, as opposed, kind of creating a unit, almost as an army unit would, somebody to watch your back. And I think that, I see way too many times companies hire great senior people, but them getting just lost in meetings. And, their talent is kind of wasted away because you hired them because they're experienced in their field, because they're a life experience, because they have 20 years in the field, but you don't use it. They sit in meetings and yeah, they give feedback and they use a little bit of it, but they use a very small part of it.
Thank you. I have one last question before we'll go to Q&A. I saw some pretty interesting questions. And what would you like to share, with, the people here, with the people from, from the business or from the corporates? What do you think is important? Some 3 things, from you. What is important to be successful, in life and in business,
Easy question, right? I think, just be the best at what you love. And if that happens to be the thing you work on, that's amazing. If that's not, quit, go do the things that makes you happy. I think that the ultimate future of economy is a combination of a freelance sort of gig economy with a lot of people outsourcing. We see more and more of this trend of these outsourcing agencies, which create a sort of almost a startup style team, and then the big corporation buys that, buys services from that company. In Czech, we have Creative Dog, and countless others, and I think that there's a pretty big future in doing that. And I think if you're as a person, if you're working in some of those environments or internal startups from companies, that's great. If you want to work at corporate, if you don't want to work at corporate, I think there's going to be more and more and more startup opportunities in Prague. That, for example, if you don't want to take the whole risk of your life and become an entrepreneur and risk really everything, and as it's obviously not easy, then join those early. So I would, for those that aren't, have the courage to try and join companies early on in the process. You will have the worst and the best time of your life. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be, you're going to learn more than you have at a corporate in 5 or 10 years, in a year or less.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, let's go to the Q&A. Just wait a sec. Yeah. So how long does it take to analyze an average corporation?
The data's in the cloud. There are some elements of the data that are not in the cloud right now. So usually takes a few days if we have the systems integrated. If we don't have the system integrated, we have to look at our kind of roadmap and see for it. But if it's G Suite, Slack, and the things we do, it's basically a few days' time. And the only thing we need is context, for example, of an HR org chart, knowing which department the person belongs to and who's their kind of line manager.
Okay, analysis is one thing. Do you consider or already do offering solutions to productivity based on identified problems?
So right now, the only one that we have is Radar, which is not really a solution to productivity itself. It's still an identification tool of the issue. So no, we don't have anything. Yes, we're planning on different solutions. We're planning to do different sort of B2C elements and try and test different things. We think there's I don't know if you know this, but for example, Doodle, the tool we use to put in the calendars, like who has time when, they just got like $40 million in funding. These little segment tools of every bit and piece of productivity is starting to become massively, massively funded. And the productivity space is already a multi-$100 billion business especially when we look at the big consultancies. So we think there's we'll have to prioritize heavily because obviously there's so many issues. But we will definitely create dashboards and enough insights so the companies really know what to do. And the sort of the vision, that's not like the imminent vision, but the eventual vision is making sure that everyone has their personalized bot, and that uses the AI of the entire platform to give them insights, the individual in the company. In fact, every individual in the company.
And are you thinking about or do you, providing some forecasting around all of these metrics?
Not yet. No, to come eventually. But honestly, there's so much historical data you can learn from, and on a monthly basis see the evolution that right now that's not even the focus. You really need to look at the problem and what it is right now. And honestly, you can't forecast in these companies. You can maybe forecast revenues with analyzing the sales team's productivity, but you can't really analyze the productivity itself because it's only based on what the company does and what the company changes. So, but we could probably predict the steps that they should take. So that's better than just predicting the performance in itself.
Okay, where did you get the data about well-working organizations? How do you know how to improve your clients' companies?
That is the billion-dollar question. So sometimes, and often most of the times, we don't know what's amazing and we don't know, what's, average. But we do know what type of behavior is really, really bad and extreme. So we look at those extreme situations and, kind of model them. And usually you're seeing this extreme type behavior or signal or a leniency to that behavior. But I think that over time, we will know more exactly through benchmarking. So if you benchmark, 1,000 companies in the same industry and, countless amount of people at similar levels, then you'll be able to provide these people exact recommendations. And I think that's what benchmarking is, where it really is.
Okay, and what do you think are the top qualities, habits you had that allowed you to build Socialbakers to what is it today?
I think, it was really we kept a very close loop of client feedback, where, when we got feedback from clients, we really quickly went and built it in the product. And this was something our clients really, really appreciated, especially in the first 5 years, 6 years of building the company, when it was sort of, okay, let's integrate. We really quickly integrated. Oftentimes, that quick integration broke things, and, you can't afford to do that in a much more scaled SaaS environment. But that's, the beginnings are always, you're working on what you think is true. And if you can verify it through clients, that's even better. And time is limited. The plan is to verify first through clients. So having the pilot use cases of the clients already standing by, because you really can't afford, if you're running a solution for 1,000-person company, you really can't afford to experiment, because you're experimenting with 1,000 people's lives, and that you really can't afford to do that.
I didn't ask about it before, but I think it's an important question as well. But you are once you started building, time is limited. Were you thinking about starting it because of that added value, or you are as well thinking about starting something that has some improvement for the clients, and maybe in the future you would like to exit from this company? So what is your strategy towards to this project?
I think time is limited is one of those projects that I think it can grow to an IPO and become a massive company without the need to ever have a traditional exit. Having said that, that's never out of question, right? In any company, and but I think that we can grow very fast to a very interesting sort of state.
Okay. And two last questions. What will you do with the time that you are saving? How will you invest that saved time?
Well, right now, a lot of that time is wasted away. So the companies really shouldn't be wasting it away, and the people should be, working more productively. So that's, they should invest that to work. But it's true that the general trend in the world is that, we've gone over the last 75 years, we've gone from 70, 80-hour work weeks down to sort of what is an average in Europe of 36, 37 hours. And we have countries like Norway and Sweden and France with an average of 30, 32, considering to go under 30. So there's already a massive trend of decrease of working time. And I think part of that is because you don't need as much people in the workforce, A. And B is, I think they can become more productive. And I think, what people do with the rest of their time is, live their life and, do fun things, whatever they love.
And last question, important one too. Do you have any competitors, challengers?
Microsoft is a small competitor we have.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jan, for your time. Definitely, if you will have a couple of minutes and stay here, and talk, because I believe that there is so much other questions which we didn't mention, but they are as well important, and people would like to ask you about it. So if you'll stay here,
I will, absolutely.
Yeah, great. And we have some.
And if I haven't mentioned it, we are hiring developers.
Yeah, we know.
If in case you have not gotten it the first, second, and third time I said it, if you know of any great people, or if you're one yourself, come and talk to us. I needed to make a sales pitch as well, sir.
Okay, yeah, and I hope that you'll enjoy your time here and definitely spend, following 10 or 20 minutes here. Try to, as at the beginning we mentioned, try to support you and other entrepreneurs, and other people here, because this is what we are trying to do and share the mission of Startup Grind. And enjoy the rest of the night. Thank you.